Chapter 18, Darkest Hour. Link sat listening to the rhythmic lapping of the boat's oars as they gently stroked the water. On either side of the river, he could hear the drone of insects among the trees and the occasional trill of birdsong. For a time, he could almost imagine he was back amongst the green bowers of his home. He could doze off for a bit with no care in the world, save for helping Saria or going on a hunt with Bryn. Maybe he'd get to train with Forens and show him how much better he was at fighting now. Then again, maybe not. On the edge of his senses, he could feel the barest threads of magic emanating from the spiritual stones in his satchel. In an odd way, he found them comforting. He considered going back to sleep, but his gnawing hunger stirred him to wakefulness. Pushing his cloak aside, Link yawned and stretched.
"How long was I asleep?"
he asked.
"A few hours. It's almost midday, you know,"
Navi replied with mock severity. Link had trouble telling whether she was amused or annoyed at his talent for sleeping. He didn't think it was that bad, certainly not as bad as some people they both knew. At the thought of Talon, he felt a pang of longing for Lon Lon, with its familiar animal smells and Malin.
"No sign of Kaepora, then?"
he asked.
"Nope, no sign of him,"
Navi answered. Link thought that was odd. He would have expected Kaepora to at least follow them or stay close to Zora's domain. Ruto had suggested he might have gone to get one of Impa's people to relay a message to her.
"Do you think something might have happened to him?"
Link asked worriedly.
"I don't know,"
Navi answered. She peered out at the surrounding trees as though expecting the bird to appear any moment.
"I wouldn't worry about it. Kaepora can look after himself. Let's just focus on getting to Castletown."
"Will we be there soon?"
he asked hopefully.
"We'll probably arrive by nightfall,"
Navi said.
"That long?"
Link asked, feeling a tad bored now that his initial excitement at being on a boat had passed. He should have brought a fishing rod or at least something else to occupy himself. "It could be worse, child," the Zora named Lutara offered. "Merchants who have traveled to the Zora Isles, far to the east of here, have to sail for days. Those not accustomed to the sea complain of upset stomachs, and that it takes too long to get anywhere by sailing. Humans do not appreciate the beauty of the sea. They see it only as an obstacle to be overcome."
"It does sound boring,"
Link said. He'd heard of the ocean before, in stories, and didn't like the idea of traversing an endless plain of water with no land in sight. Just water as far as the eye could behold. Lutara smiled while her companion snorted.
"What's it like in the Zora Isles?"
Link asked. With that, Lutara launched into a tale of a chain of islands far to the east, beyond the eastern fringes of Mithra. She said it was a place of pristine wilderness, with fish of many different shapes and sizes swarming beneath the waters. There were white beaches, and the water glistened like a sea of diamonds. It did sound pretty in its own way. Link probably would have listened to more had his stomach not reminded him of a more pressing issue. He'd had little to eat at Zora's domain, save for some very salty fish. Besides, being vomited on by a gargantuan fish hadn't left him much of an appetite. Ruto had given him some provisions which turned out to be more salted fish and black bread dotted with seeds. There was some small raw crayfish too, which Link didn't like the look of. He offered these morsels to Lutara and was surprised when the two Zora ate them, shell and all. Feeling sleepy again, Link lay back down and let the gentle sway of the boat ease him into a pleasant slumber. It seemed like he only just drifted off to sleep when he woke back to discover the river was no longer calm and peaceful. A frigid gale stirred the trees along the riverbank, its cold fingers lashing at Link as he lay beneath his cloak.
"What's going on?"
he asked, sitting up and pulling his cloak tightly around his shoulders. "Looks like a storm," Lutara said, pursing her lips and frowning as she gazed up at the sky.
"Oh, great."
Link did not like the thought of being out on the open water in the rain on a winter's day. It soon became apparent that this was no minor squall. The wind gained strength, almost blowing the less sturdy trees along the bank sideways. The river swelled and the water heaved. Soon, Link was clinging to the sides of the boat in an effort not to fall out. His food swayed in rhythm with the boat, up and down, up and down. It wasn't pleasant, and at this rate, there was only one direction his lunch was going.
I don't feel so good,
Link moaned. He leaned over the side, expelling his stomach contents into the churning river.
Hylians have such weak stomachs,
Lorne observed without a hint of sympathy. Link leaned further over the side as his stomach convulsed again, heedless of the danger.
Link, be careful!
Navi exclaimed, noticing what Link hadn't. Too late. Link slipped. With a cry of dismay, he clawed at the vessel's side, desperately trying to find a hold, his arms windmilling. He went head first toward the waves, then was jerked upward violently, his body slamming into the boat. The craft was now leaning dangerously to one side, with Link's head hanging mere inches above the water.
Link!
Navi cried out, but Link was too shocked to scream. Lutara, holding him by both ankles, yanked him back into the boat.
Thanks,
Link gasped as he clambered back into his seat. Navi flew down beside him, looking stunned.
I'm okay.
Then his heart lurched as he thought of the spiritual stones. To his relief, the satchel was still tightly secured. Nothing had fallen overboard. You can thank me again if we get this boat to Castletown's dock in one piece, Lutara was saying, but Link barely paid her any heed. Her next words, however, sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the winter winds. We may have to pull into shore if this swell gets any worse. I've never seen it like this, not on a river so far from the sea. It's as though some magic is churning the waters.
Some magic?
Link did not like the sound of that. He looked up at Navi, hoping she might have some insight into what was going on. She just shook her head.
I can't sense anything,
she told him.
Perhaps Lord Jabu Jabu is having second thoughts about us releasing you,
Lauren said severely.
Did you offend him somehow?
What?
Link was both startled and offended.
I did not!
There is no need for such superstition, Lorne, Lutara said evenly. If the gods were angry with us, then I'm sure they'd be a little more subtle. As for you, Link, I am certain Lord Jabu Jabu is most pleased that you healed him of his ailment. We all owe you a debt of gratitude. Lutara shot a none too subtle death glare at Lorne, and then smiled at Link.
Princess Ruto deserves some of the credit,
he admitted, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Just then, a distant clap of thunder pealed through the air. This seemed to decide the Zora, and they quickly steered the boat towards the shore. Vegetation and rocks encroached upon the bank, making it difficult to see the danger just around the river bend. The Zora struggled desperately to move their boat through the rapidly flowing current. Just as they rounded the corner, Link picked up a familiar crackling groan of a tree about to fall. He saw it a heartbeat later, jutting straight out from the twisted tangle of vegetation. The Zora cried out and desperately tried to maneuver the craft out of the way. It was too late. With a tremendous crack, the roots were ripped from the earth. The tree toppled over, its splayed limbs splashing into the water. The Zora's quick action prevented their small vessel from being crushed in an instant. Instead, the boat slammed straight into the limbs of the falling tree with a sickening crunch. Wood split and snapped as the branches tore through the boat's keel. Link was thrown face first into the seat in front, and cold water rushed into the sinking craft. Before he knew what was happening, Link was knee-deep in cold water. Navi flew above him, yelling,
Quick, get out!
Both Zora had been flung off the boat by the impact and were nowhere to be seen. He could feel the boat's wooden hull breaking before a loud popping noise alerted him to the vessel's imminent demise. Not daring to wait for rescue, Link leapt onto one of the tree's twisted limbs. Still woozy from the tossing and turning of the boat, and far less sure-footed than usual, his legs gave out. He slipped, slapping against an adjacent branch as he toppled straight into the water. The cold pressed in on him like a frigid blanket, smothering him. Shocked and dazed, it was a moment before Link realized what was happening. He was sinking. Frantically, he tried to push himself towards the surface, yet with each desperate kick, the water's surface grew more distant. Link's cloak, and not to mention the rest of his gear, was dragging him down. He was going to drown. Panic blossomed in him, pressing in on him as heavily as the water. Link stopped kicking and fumbled at his brooch, trying to tear it loose. His gear was heavy with water and now pulled him towards the riverbed. As he tried to get his brooch undone, Link's lungs began to burn. The light danced tantalizingly on the river's surface, beckoning to him. He stopped clawing at his brooch, panic clouding his senses as his only thought became getting to the surface.
Breathe in!
His mind screamed. Soon, every muscle in his body was screaming for him to breathe.
I'm going to drown!
Everything started to feel numb, blissful, as though he were merely sinking into sleep. That wasn't so bad. He barely noticed his lungs still screaming desperately for air. Yielding to their plea, he choked on water. A hand grabbed him and he found himself rising through the water. He barely perceived the sleek white form of Azora swimming beside him. Then his head broke the river's surface, the cold air brushing against his damp skin. Darkness began to close in on him. He crashed hard into something solid, landing on his stomach, only vaguely aware that it was the ground. Yet despite his body's desperate efforts, he still couldn't breathe. Something heavy smacked him sharply on the back, and he found himself coughing up what felt like the entire river. He took several rasping breaths, coughing between each gasp, trying to gulp down the precious air.
Bloody idiot! You swim like a Goron!
He vaguely heard someone growl.
What possessed you to get out of the boat with all that?
Let him be, Lorne. Give the poor thing time to catch his breath, Lutara said. Link struggled to his knees, helped up by Lutara.
Link?
Navi sounded beside herself.
You frightened me half to death! Just try to breathe. You'll be okay.
Was that an attempt to reassure him or herself? Link wasn't sure. He tried to pick himself up, but his legs felt too weak, and he almost fell over. Lutara gripped his arm as he swayed. You should rest for a bit, she suggested. You have had quite a shock. His limbs were too heavy to protest, and he sagged to the ground like a waterlogged sack.
Can you get a fire going?
Navi asked frantically. In a moment, little sprite, Lutara soothed. She helped Link lie down and then said something quietly to Lorne as she helped Link pull off his wet cloak.
Link?
Navi zipped to his side, her face frightened.
I'm okay,
he said hoarsely. He could tell she didn't believe him. He wasn't sure he believed himself either. He was shivering violently, feeling dazed and sick.
I'm going to see if I can get some herbs to help you feel better. Just...
A loud hoot caused everyone to jerk their heads up to see an owl land on the end of the fallen trunk that was now embedded in the riverbank.
Kepura!
Navi exclaimed as the owl looked at them.
Where have you been? We almost drowned in that river.
I am sorry I did not arrive sooner,
he said before tilting his head.
What happened to...
A talking owl? Lutara exclaimed, jumping to her feet.
Yes,
Kepura said wearily.
Surely your king thought to mention this? I do grow tired of repeating myself sometimes. Yes, I am a talking owl.
He returned his gaze to Link.
What in Ferora's name happened to you?
I fell in the river,
Link managed.
A tree almost fell on top of our boat, and we crashed right into it.
Navi explained, sounding suddenly angry.
Where were you?
I am sorry I could not arrive sooner.
Kepura almost sounded apologetic as he explained.
A boblin lurking on the edge of the river got lucky and shot me with an arrow. It was poorly aimed and only grazed me. Though I am loath to admit it, I crashed. The boblins pounced on me. I escaped more thanks to the wolves hunting down the boblins than anything else. I fled to the great Decatree's grove, and Saria saw to my injuries. It is fortunate you have the Kokiri emerald on you. Had I not recognized it, finding you would have been a difficult task.
Are you all right now?
Navi asked.
I will be fine,
Kepura replied.
Why are there so many boblins around?
Link asked through chattering teeth. Lorne had managed to get a fire going as Kaepora talked, but it was nowhere near enough to warm him.
That doesn't matter now, Kaepora said. Right now, you need to rest and dry off.
Link didn't think he was in a position to argue with that. Lutara helped him peel off his sodden tunic so that he wore only his leggings. As Lorne added more wood to the fire, its warmth soaked into his skin. Soon, Link didn't feel so deathly cold. He was finding it easier to breathe now, between the occasional coughing fit, but his head still swam. Before long, Link huddled close to the warm fire. Navi and Kaepora kept a watchful eye on him, as though worried he might pass out. It seemed to take forever for that sickening sensation of weakness to abate. As night fell, the Zora cooked some fish over the fire and offered it to him. By now, the storm was rumbling around them, and thick drops of rain threatened to soak Link yet again. The wind had not eased either, and Link was worried Kaepora might have trouble flying.
This wind will be troublesome, but it is not as vicious in the forest as it is in the open fields,
he assured Link.
The worst that can happen is that I have to take you to somewhere close to Kakariko.
Link agreed to this idea. He could always stay at the Dancing Goron and then travel to Castletown the following day. As for the two Zora, they decided to wait until the storm had blown itself out, and then they would return to Zora's domain. With that decided, and once he was sufficiently recovered to depart, Link gathered his meager possessions, dressed in his dried tunic, and bid the two Zora farewell. Once done, he climbed onto Kaepora's back while Navi curled up uncomfortably in the pocket of his tunic. It was not a pleasant journey. Their flight through the thickets of the woods was slow, cold, and wet. The wind buffeted Kaepora, and soon lightning flashed around them. Tree limbs snatched at them, and Link found himself thinking he might have been safer walking than flying on Kaepora's back. It was a relief when the lost woods gave way to scattered copses and open fields. Link spotted the glowing lights of the homesteads scattered about the hills outside Kakariko, and his mind wandered amidst thoughts of a warm fire and hot food. It was then that Link spotted a red glow that stretched across the northern sky. Then, as Kaepora began to ascend to take a look, Link realized it was coming from the city. In the distance, Castletown burned, and the castle was a dark silhouette against the blood-red sky. Kaepora's cry of dismay echoed Link's own.
Hang on, I will try to fly close enough to see what is happening,
Kaepora said, sounding almost frantic.
If this is Ganondorf's work, I will have to get us to the Temple of Time, and quickly.
As they approached the burning city, something itched in the back of Link's mind. A sense of déjà vu. There was something familiar about this. Then he remembered. He had seen Castletown burning in a dream. He recalled Ganondorf raising his hand, eldritch lightning bursting forth and striking his fairy. This was where he'd seen Navi die. The chill he felt had little to do with the bitter wind. Kaepora flew towards the wall, and just as they approached it, Link heard a dull thunk. A horrible screech pierced the night, and Kaepora made a sickening lurch, banking steeply to one side. Link clung to the owl's feathers for dear life, his stomach dropping as the owl plummeted towards the wall.
What's happening?
Navi cried.
Kaepora, what are you doing?
Link knew, but he could not bring himself to believe it. An arrow shaft was protruding from the owl's side, blood streaming steadily from the wound. Kaepora seemed to force a surge of strength into his wings, their unsteady strokes beating madly against the unyielding wind as the owl tried and failed to gain altitude. Kaepora veered off to his left, missing the wall by inches. Stretching his wings, he slowed down, but it wasn't enough to soften the impact. Navi zipped free of Link's pocket as Kaepora slammed into the muddy earth with such force that the impact would have shattered the bones of an ordinary bird. Link was thrown from his feathery perch and flung into the earth. His bag came open, spilling its contents onto the ground. He rolled, unable to gain a breath, tumbling over and over until he came to a halt beside the Zora River's steep, rock-studded bank. Aching from a dozen bruises and scratches, Link struggled to his feet. His head spun, but he tried to ignore it as he focused on Caepora. The owl was struggling to his feet, his head cocked as he examined one wing. Distantly, Link could hear an awful chorus of screams and panicked shouts that mingled with the clash of steel upon steel and hideous, bestial cries.
What's happening?
His worst nightmares were coming to life around him, sending Link's heart thundering. For a moment, he stood there, unsure of what to do. Then Caepora screeched, and Link realized with a jolt that he'd just tried to rip the arrow free from his flesh. It hadn't worked.
Caepora, what?
A Stalfos archer on the wall,
Caepora replied, his voice racked with pain.
One of the guards killed it just as it shot me.
Link was nonplussed. He had heard of Stalfos before, but he certainly didn't think they were real. They were just a story meant to dissuade children from straying into the woods at night.
Stalfos, here?
Navi asked. Link could hear the horror in her voice.
How is that possible?
I don't know,
Caepora replied.
You have to pull the arrow out. I should still be able to fly.
Hesitantly, Link grabbed the arrow shaft. Looking away from Caepora, he swallowed thickly and pulled the shaft. The owl shrieked as the arrow ripped through flesh with a horrible wet sound. It came free, shaft and barb stained red. Link dropped the projectile like a poisonous spider. The arrow wound was deep, a thick sheet of blood now coating the owl's feathers. Link did not need Navi's help to realize it was serious.
Are you sure you can still fly?
Link asked the owl.
Not far,
Caepora answered.
but far enough for what we must do. Twice in one day. Damn the odds.
Link wasn't sure he understood that, but Caepora gave him no time to ponder.
I will fly to the Temple of Time. If this is the work of Ganondorf, I must help protect it. And should I find Impa, I will tell her to head there with the Ocarina of Time. I regret I can't carry you with this injury, or else I would.
But
Link started, finding the will to speak.
you won't make it! Not with that!
I will be fine.
Caepora insisted. Link was sure the owl was just trying to reassure him.
Meet me at the temple. I will tell Impa and Zelda to meet us there.
We don't even know if they're still alive!
Navi pointed out, and Link was dismayed by the fear in her voice.
They are alive.
Caepora answered weakly.
They are?
Link asked.
How do you know?
Just trust me. There is still time to undo this.
Caepora explained hastily.
I will send whatever aid I can to guide you to the temple, or at least make sure your path is clear.
How exactly are you going to achieve that?
Navi asked.
No time to explain. Just trust me.
Caepora's voice grew more urgent.
Follow me and stay small. You must not be seen by Ganondorf's own. Do you understand?
Link swallowed and nodded, even though he was quite sure he didn't understand. Without another word, Caepora unfurled his wings and took flight, his beating wings carrying him high into the air. He banked, turning swiftly, and disappeared beyond the wall. A prompt word from Navi reminded Link to move, and so he did. He retrieved the items that had fallen from his bag and stuffed them back in. As Link worked, he was sure he heard someone whistle. Unable to see anything, he resumed his task and gathered the last of his things. He retrieved Saria's ocarina, gazed at it for a moment, and then pocketed it. A sudden clinking of chains drew his attention to the drawbridge. It was opening. A sudden sense of something, a sudden sense of déjà vu, drew Link towards it. The seemingly unfinished stone bridge extended almost all the way across the river, ending abruptly where it met the lower drawbridge.
Link, wait!
Navi yelled.
Caepora said to keep low!
Link didn't hear her. As he reached the beginning of the bridge, a loud neigh coming from afar nearly sent him catatonic. He froze in his tracks, remembering Caepora's words. By the time he could will his frozen limbs to move, it was too late to do anything. The next flash of lightning revealed a white mare, a girl, and a woman seated in its saddle. They were riding straight towards him, and Link didn't need to see the riders to know who they were.
Get out of the way, kid!
Impa yelled.
Move!
The horse thundered towards him. hooves crashing onto the wooden drawbridge and then onto the stone bridge beyond. With only heartbeats to spare, Link flung himself to the side, jumping the short distance of the bridge and onto the steep slope of the riverbank. He landed awkwardly, slipping on the slick rocks that lined the bank, and fell over. He twisted, scrambled to his feet, and climbed up the uneven bank in time to see Zelda meet his gaze. She said something to Impa, who nodded.
Link, he's coming!
Zelda screamed hoarsely.
Get to the Temple of Time! Play the song on the altar!
She threw something as the horse thundered past. For an instant, the sky was awash in a flicker of lightning, illuminating a small oblong instrument as it flew through the air. It came to rest just shy of Link's feet, skittering and bouncing off the jagged stones. Link scooped it up, recognizing what he was holding. Faint fairy light revealed the Ocarina of Time.
What did she mean by play the song on the altar?
He frowned, looking up to shout a question, but Zelda was already too far away, the night swallowing her and Impa. For a few moments, Link just stared after them. Did Zelda or Impa somehow know that Kaepora was going to meet him at the temple? With Kaepora in his condition, Link was not sure how that would help. His mind still trying to desperately make sense of everything that had just happened, Link scrambled back up the last of the slope, making his way to the road just before the stone bridge. Trepidation filled him, the night alive with the terrible sounds of battle, a battle he was sure the Hylians were losing. Shaking off his fear and realizing he was too exposed, Link started towards the bridge, hoping to slip unnoticed into the forest of buildings. He didn't get far.
Link, hide! Someone's coming!
Navi's words broke him from his thoughts.
I can sense him!
He thrust the Ocarina of Time into his satchel, secured it, and then searched for somewhere to hide. It was too late. Even as Link considered hiding beside the bridge, the black-clad figure of Ganondorf burst into view, his mount snorting as he tugged on the reins and brought the animal to a halt.
Damn those guards!
The man growled, anger burning in his eyes.
Now she's escaped.
Ganondorf's sword was drawn, stained with the blood of its most recent victims. As he cast his eyes about the shrouded hills, he caught sight of Navi's azure glow. He frowned, and then turned his gaze to meet Link's own. Baleful yellow eyes met steel blue. Link knew he was very much alone, and now nothing stood between him and Ganondorf. His muscles went rigid, terror tightening its grip over him as the eyes of the tall, imposing figure bore into his own.
You boy!
Ganondorf barked.
I saw the girl throw something to you. I dare say I know what it was. Give it to me!
He held out a hand, fixing Link with a look that left no doubt he expected to be obeyed.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Link stammered, deciding that no matter what, he wasn't going to tell this man anything. If he feigned ignorance, perhaps the man would disregard him and continue after his query. Even as Link considered this idea, he realized it wouldn't work, and his doubts were soon affirmed.
Don't lie to me, boy!
The man's voice grew dangerous. For a heartbeat, his gaze flickered from Link to Navi's glowing form, then back again.
I know you're one of Impa's little servants. Give me the ocarina now, or I will kill your fairy. If you are a Kokiri, which I doubt, then you will die along with her.
No!
Link wasn't sure where the surge of angry defiance came from. As it crashed over him, he drew his sword and shield.
No! I won't let you hurt her, or anyone else!
Ganondorf's lips curled into a smirk.
You want to fight me?
He scoffed, then snorted disdainfully.
You have guts, kid. I'll give you that.
In the distance, a loud roar reverberated across the land. Ganondorf looked up, his eyes focusing on something in the direction of Death Mountain. His gaze then snapped straight back to Link.
Do you even know who I am, boy?
He asked.
Or have you just believed the bile those Sheikah fed you?
Link didn't answer.
No answer?
There was a glint in his eyes now that made them seem more frightening still.
Then, allow me to show you, and perhaps then, you can do me the courtesy of kneeling.
Ganondorf rose his hands, and instantly Link saw a familiar gem on the palm of his gauntlet. It began to shine with an eldritch glow, and a ball of white light shot out of it. There was movement out of the corner of Link's eyes. He saw Navi dive to block Ganondorf's attack, and knew with a terrible certainty that the spell would kill her.
Navi!
Link screamed. The white ball of light tore through the air towards her. Link stepped forward, lowering his shield and dropping his sword. With a flick of his hand, he slapped Navi out of the way, sending her spiraling through the air. Now there was nothing between Link and Ganondorf, save for a slab of stout wood. The shield took the brunt of the blast, its shattered splinters flying through the air. It wasn't enough, and the luminous ball of lightning continued straight into its target. Pain. Pain pulsed through his body in a wave of searing agony. It was as if he was on fire. Hot tendrils of fire searing through muscle, artery, and vein. The familiar rhythm of his heart faltered, spasmed, and then resumed, its sudden pounding resounding in his ears. When the pain subsided, every muscle in his body ached, and his limbs responded sluggishly to his efforts to move them. Link didn't remember hitting the ground, but there he was, one cheek lying against the damp earth. Spots of light danced in front of his eyes, and Ganondorf was a fuzzy dim blur some feet away. Link coughed and sucked in a breath. It was like breathing in hot ash, and he coughed again. Rolling onto his back, he blinked, unable to get rid of the lights that swayed across his vision like erratic fireflies. Focusing on Ganondorf, blinking furiously as he tried to clear his vision, Link realized the man had dismounted from his horse. He could see Ganondorf more clearly now, and it was then that he noticed that Ganondorf was stepping towards him. Each squelching thump of the man's boots upon the sodden earth made Link flinch. Too weak to move, he could only watch as Ganondorf stopped beside him and rose his blade. Link froze, unable to draw breath, certain that at any moment that sword would pierce him, and there was no stopping it. But Ganondorf didn't strike. Instead, he sheathed his sword, and Link knew a moment of confusion before one heavy boot stepped onto his chest, snatching away what little breath he had. He moaned, pain rippling through his ribs as they strained and cracked. Ganondorf regarded Link silently, placing most of his weight on his other foot so as not to crush him. This allowed Link to breathe in a whisper of air as Ganondorf watched him, considering something.
That was but a taste of what I can do, boy.
Ganondorf's voice was dangerous.
Are you going to be more cooperative now, or shall we try that again?
As Ganondorf rose his hand again, the gauntlet's gem glowing, the fear that seized Link became an icy fist, crushing him as sure as the boot that pinned him.
I'm going to die!
He thought.
I'm going to die!
The gemstone was glowing brighter now, and all Link could think of was the terrible agony of the last blast.
Please!
He managed to wheeze in a pitifully choked whisper.
Just let me go! Please!
To his immense shame, Link felt his bladder loosen, further drenching his breeches. Ganondorf didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't care.
Shall we?
Ganondorf asked again, malice rich in his tone. Shivering, Link squeezed his eyes shut, willing away the tears that threatened to spill, and shook his head. The weight on his chest shifted, and Link opened his eyes again to meet Ganondorf's leering gaze. He'd lowered his hand, and Link struggled to keep his eyes away from it and on Ganondorf's face.
Good. You will be of far more use to me alive if what I suspect is true.
I don't know what you're talking about!
Link managed to rasp.
No?
Ganondorf asked, regarding him with that cruel smile, the gem on his gauntlet glowing again, warning him that one misstep would end in pain.
We can do this one of two ways, kid. Or I can make you help me.
Then Ganondorf noticed something lying in the grass beside Link. Saria's ocarina. It must have fallen from his pocket when he fell.
No!
Ganondorf stepped off of him and picked up the ocarina. Link drew a ragged breath, pain slicing through his ribs like dozens of burning knives. He groaned, clutching his ribs as a spasm of coughing seized him again. Managing to catch his breath, he turned his attention to Ganondorf, a flash of rage and fear coursing through him. Ganondorf was regarding Saria's ocarina, frowning as he turned it over in his hand. He was not given much time to work out whether it was the one he was after, for a loud roar of fury reverberated through the air, and as it did, Link felt a familiar creature brush against his mind. Volvagia!
Treachery and treason! What is this that I see?
The dragon's voice boomed, its voice echoing through his head.
Hear me, Gerudo King. If I find you have harmed but a hair upon his head, I will rip the meat from your bones! For eons, my ancestor Phyrus, first amongst the sages, watched over Din's land. You dare to desecrate it with your foul magic. Your kin will curse you. They will see you as the monster that you are.
Link could not have said how he did it, but he felt the dragon's awareness turn to him.
I come, friend of Darunia. Are you hurt?
Link could only think one thing in response. Help me!
I could see you both. Get out of the way if you can, and I will deal with him. If you cannot, then I will have to improvise.
Ganondorf scowled, pocketing the ocarina, and then Link saw Volvagia's black wings emerge from the shadows, towns of fire snapping from his maw. Ganondorf merely sneered, apparently unfazed by the size of the powerful carnivore swooping towards him.
Run, little one!
Volvagia's voice echoed through Link's mind. Seeing that Ganondorf was distracted, Link scrambled to his feet. He picked up his sword and ran. Navi, still in a daze, picked herself up and fled with him. Moments later, and before Ganondorf could turn his attention on Link, Volvagia sent fire spewing towards the man. Heat rippled through the air, drenching Link in its searing embrace.
Let it kill him! Please let it be over!
Link thought desperately, looking back to see the flames enveloping the spot where Ganondorf stood.
Let him be dead!
As the flames receded, Ganondorf was still standing, neither singed by the fire nor harmed in any way. The man just looked up at the dragon and smirked. Volvagia gave a roar of outrage and turned his attention on Ganondorf's bolting horse. Seizing the opportunity, Volvagia spewed another stream of fire at the fleeing animal, quickly wiping the sneer from Ganondorf's face. The enormous horse screamed a terrible cry that ended as it collapsed in a smoldering heap.
That was my horse, dragon!
Ganondorf snarled, raising the palm of his hand as Volvagia flew back towards him. The gem glowed, and a bright ball of lightning arced through the air.
Run, Link!
Volvagia screamed in Link's mind.
Run, and don't look back!
Link did, sprinting towards the drawbridge with Navi flying fast behind him. A loud roar of pain echoed through the air as Ganondorf's lightning struck Volvagia. Moments later, it was followed by a resounding crash, and the earth beneath Link's feet shuddered as something heavy hit the ground. Against his better judgment, and against Volvagia's words, Link looked back. Volvagia was struggling to his feet as Ganondorf reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a mask that was all too familiar. Volvagia instantly went rigid, paralyzed. In a heartbeat, Link became witness to the horror of the mask's power. Volvagia moved, but there was something horribly wrong. The dragon started twisting and thrashing like a recently beheaded serpent. Was it having a fit? Link wondered. He had heard of those, but never had he imagined a dragon having one. Volvagia's eyes rolled into his head until all that could be seen was the whites of his eyes.
Ganondorf's killing him!
Navi gasped. She seemed to come back to her senses then.
We have to get out of here, now!
Link ran into the town despite all of his instincts telling him he should be running away. As he reached the gatehouse, he heard a roar. He turned to see Volvagia struggling to his feet, and Link felt a sudden surge of magic rippling through the air. Hope flickered inside of him, kindled by the sight of the rising dragon. Then Volvagia turned, his eyes now fixed on Link. No, Link realized. Not on him, but the drawbridge. The dragon lunged forward, Volvagia's powerful limbs propelling him onto the stone bridges as fire spewed from his maw.
Stop!
Ganondorf bellowed. Volvagia slammed his forelimbs down on the heavy timbers of the drawbridge. The bridge groaned, Navi screeched for Link to get out of the way, and then with a cataclysmic roar of sound, the drawbridge collapsed. The chains snapped, hanging uselessly from the gatehouse, while the ruined and burning bridge plunged into the river's depths. Then a burst of magic shot out from Ganondorf's gauntlet, and the dragon, its wings beating to keep it from falling off the broken bridge, spun around to face him.
Volvagia is buying us time!
Navi managed to say.
Quick, run!
Link ran, leaving the battle between Volvagia and Ganondorf behind. He didn't get far before a roar that was more akin to a scream rattled him. With an icy certainty, Link knew the battle was over.
Go!
Navi urged him.
Quick, we have to get out of here!
And so they did, descending into a scene far worse than anything Link's most vivid nightmares could conjure. Nothing he'd faced, nothing he'd seen, prepared him for what he saw. The city was well and truly ablaze, and at least in this part of the city, it was devoid of any friendly soul. Twice Link had to divert around a patrol of Bulblin and Gerudo. It wasn't easy, as nearly every block in this part of the city was on fire. Then there was the dead. They were everywhere. Mothers clung to their children, trying to shelter them from the blades that killed them. Cloudy eyes stared up at the firelit sky, and terror still clenched its icy grip around Link's stomach. Some of the dying moaned incoherently, but Link ran on, deaf to their harrowing cries. In the distance, the clash of weapons screamed through the night, telling him that some in Castletown still fought for their lives.
It's all gone wrong!
The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke. It stung his eyes and throat, nearly choking him. Worse still was the smell of burning flesh. He had smelt it before, and bile rose in his throat. Distantly, bells within the town were ringing, singing a desperate chorus that heralded the town's doom. One by one they were going quiet, the resounding peal forever silenced. Navi did her best to keep Link from noticing the carnage. Link wasn't even sure if he was going the right way, only that Navi diverted them twice more as a patrol of Bulblins and worse marched down the street. A lone guard, slumped and bleeding against the wall, called out to him, but Link did not even notice. Twice they came across a Blinn patrol tormenting the few survivors of the initial carnage. Young, old, or infirm, it bore no difference. Then he arrived in the marketplace, and his eyes could not quite comprehend the magnitude of what he saw. Men and horses, all wearing the proud colors of the Hyrulean Royal Guard, lay crumpled and bloodied upon the cobblestones, some with limbs twisted at unnatural angles.
Keep moving!
Link ran to the opposite end of the market square, stopping to make sure that nobody was following him. Then he tripped and fell on a small body that stared up at him with vacant eyes. At first, Link was so shocked he didn't even understand what it was he saw. When he did, he screamed and scrambled away. A child, a girl a few years younger than himself, gazed up at him. She had been stabbed multiple times, her tattered nightrobe stained with blood. That very same blood covered Link's hands. Seeing this, he desperately tried to get it off, clawing at his arms. Something inside of him began to crumble, and all his earlier resolve came crashing down.
Link, stop that! Listen to me! We have to keep going!
Navi said, flying back to his side. Link wasn't listening. He scrambled backward instead, and then his fingers touched something wet and sticky. It was a severed hand. Link only got a few feet away before he collapsed, trembling in a heap.
I'm sorry,
he whispered. Even without looking, he could still see the expression on the girl's face.
It's all gone wrong! None of this should be happening!
Link, please, we have to move!
Navi insisted. He didn't stir.
Link?
Navi hovered close to the boy's face, noticing him staring vacantly at his blood-stained hands.
Link, listen to me. We can still make things right. You have to believe that. We just need to get to the temple. It's okay to be afraid, but you have to keep going. Please, Link, get up. For me. For Saria.
Link was silent for the longest time. Then he swallowed thickly, nodded, and stood up. His legs were weak and unsteady, and he hardly realized how much he'd been shaking. His body ached with weariness, hysteria not helping matters, but he knew what he had to do. He still felt numb, driven by determination alone as his body screamed for a respite he couldn't give. They ran through alleys and streets, and as they did, a strange numbness crept into Link's core. He saw the dead, but he no longer felt anything for them. He felt hollow, empty. It was as though, in a desperate bid to protect itself, his mind had blocked the pain that came with that feeling, replacing it with a terrible numbness. Finally, the winding streets gave way to a large open plaza at the front of an enormous stone temple. The beautiful garden, lined with hedges and well-tended trees, seemed at odds with the burning town. The temple itself still stood, untouched by the fires ravaging the rest of the town.
Kaepora's not here.
Navi observed as they ran towards a flight of steps that would take them into the temple. Link didn't contemplate her words, so deep in shock that he didn't comprehend what she said. Link climbed the stone stairs, his exhausted limbs nearly buckling, and reached the gilded doors at the temple's entrance. Pushing one of the heavy doors open, he realized that he had been here before, or at least he'd been to a place that was eerily similar to this. The tall walls of the Temple of Time stretched towards the heavens, reaching up to the vaulted ceiling decorated with reliefs that depicted Hyrule's creation. Candelabras beside the tall stone pillars stood unlit. Instead, the harsh red glow of firelight illuminated the temple. Almost hidden in the shadows, 2 wooden doors stood ajar. Between them was an enormous stone slab with a mural of the sun across its surface. Closer at hand, Link saw a stone dais in the shape of a hexagon at the room's center. Just beyond the dais was an altar, strange glyphs carved into its pristine surface. The steps on either side of the altar led up to the stone door, which Link now guessed was the Door of Time. Link walked to it, stepping around the bodies of people dressed in robes of ebony and gold. Their throats had been slit, and it appeared that none of them had been armed, save for the intricately carved staffs that lay near their bodies. Link barely noticed them, feeling a strange, cold weight settle in him. When he reached the altar, he noticed the words engraved on a plaque. Beneath the ancient writing, a series of parallel lines interceded with circles were carved into the stone. Link had seen Saria draw something similar. Music notes. Having learned to play by ear, he had no idea how to read it.
The writing says to place the spiritual stones on the altar and play the Song of Time,
said Navi. When she saw Link's eyes glaze over the music, she frowned.
You can't read music?
Link shook his head mutely.
I can sing it,
Navi suggested.
Place the stones on the altar first. See those little indentations in the stone? Put them in there.
Link did this, removing the stones and placing them where Navi indicated. Each little nook was shaped to fit one of the spiritual stones, and as Link placed them in their respective positions, each stone began to glow brighter, radiating a soft heat. Now what? He asked.
We play the Song of Time,
Navi said. She flew up to the music score engraved on the plaque, while Link took out the Ocarina of Time.
Navi, you said this ocarina can send us back in time?
Link asked.
Can't we do that now?
Not without knowing how it works. Zelda might have been able to tell us, or Impa.
Or Kaepora.
Link thought grimly. It was the first time that he managed to acknowledge to himself that Kaepora was gone. Strangely, his emotions felt muted.
Link?
Navi asked uncertainly.
I would give you a moment if I could, but someone is eventually going to find us here.
Link nodded, placing the ocarina to his lips. Navi began to sing the melody on the plaque. It was a simple tune, a single octave, slow and possessing an air of mystery. Once Navi finished, Link played. He hoped that his success, and indeed Zelda's last instruction, did not depend on his ocarina skills. This fear proved unwarranted. It took more than one go, and Link knew a flutter of panic on the third attempt, but he knew he'd finally played the song correctly when a faint blue aura spread across the ocarina's surface. The flickering glow of the spiritual stones intensified, and as it did so, Link thought he could feel a presence emanating from each stone, almost like something or someone was trying to reach out to him. As that happened, a low rumble filled the empty hall.
It worked!
Navi exclaimed. Above the stone door with its sun mural, Link noticed a Triforce insignia etched into the stone. It was glowing with radiant light, and Link could sense an ancient magic rippling through the temple. With a crack, a fissure split the sun mural in half, and the stone door slid open. The dark chamber beyond the archway beckoned. With one look behind him, Link walked up to the small flight of steps and through the archway. He suspected he knew what was in the inner sanctum, not just from Impa and Zelda's words, but also because he'd seen it before. Sure enough, he found himself approaching a dais with a pedestal at its center. A sword had been slid into the stone, its indigo hilt encrusted with an amber gem, glistening in the faint light. Link climbed the dais. So tired and so sore, it was like climbing the side of a mountain. When he reached the blade, he realized it was nearly as tall as he was.
This is it. This is the last seal protecting the sacred realm,
Navi said, a note of apprehension in her voice.
The final seal? That sounds like I ought to be leaving it alone.
There had been no time for Zelda to explain what would happen once he grabbed that sword.
What now?
Link asked.
Well, Impa said it leads to the Triforce in the sacred realm. She and Zelda must have meant for us to take it and stop Ganondorf.
How?
According to legend, the Triforce fulfills the wish of the one who touches it. So, if we wish for Hyrule to be restored and Ganondorf to be banished, it should work.
Technically, that's 2 wishes. What happens when I touch the sword?
Link asked Navi, still uncertain.
How would I know? Nobody has pulled it out since...
She trailed off.
Since the last cycle,
Link thought.
the last hero to wield this sword. I'm not a hero, though. Heroes don't get everyone around them hurt.
And their britches didn't stink of urine either.
There was only one way to find out.
Link said, pushing away the torrent of thoughts threatening to consume him. As he looked at the blade, Link felt a surge of anger flood through him. Why hadn't Zelda given him more thorough instructions? Why had they fled instead of running to the temple?
Maybe they thought you weren't coming until it was too late to turn back,
he thought to himself.
Perhaps they hoped you would hide, or that Ganondorf would regard you as unimportant.
He hadn't seen anybody else on the road, but he had little doubt there would be a lot of people fleeing through the other gates. Perhaps Impa had hoped Ganondorf would be so intent on catching up to her that he would disregard the sight of a child. Knowing there was no point in hesitating anymore, Link grabbed the blade's hilt. He hesitated, wondering what would happen when he pulled the sword from the stone. What would happen if he tried to use it and he wasn't the hero? Would it kill him?
But the goddess said you're the chosen hero,
a voice in Link's mind told him. Link dismissed the thought. If he was a hero, he had failed.
You want me to count to 3?
Navi asked.
We're running out of time.
Link shook his head, missing the sudden note of fear in Navi's voice.
I'll do it,
he managed tiredly.
1.
He gripped the blade so tight his fingers hurt.
2.
Preparing to heave the blade with all his might, Link sucked in a breath and held it.
3.
Link tugged at the sword's hilt. It slid out of the pedestal with a scrape of steel against stone. The unexpected lack of resistance took Link by surprise, and he almost stumbled backward. He held his breath, waiting for the moment the blade's magic would burst to life and kill him. Nothing happened. The amber gem was glowing faintly. He wasn't sure what that meant, or if it meant anything at all. Then the gem began to glow brighter, just as the stones had. Before Link could move, a ring of blue flames leapt up around the edge of the dais. He cried out in shock, stumbling back off the pedestal and nearly dropping the sword.
Navi, what's happening?
He asked. She didn't reply.
Navi?
When she didn't answer him, he looked up to regard her, and then his blood ran cold. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at something beyond the archway, seemingly paralyzed by fear. That was when Link heard it. The distinct thump of boots and the jingle of heavy armor as someone climbed the dais. A familiar, cold, cruel laugh echoed through the chamber. Slowly, Link turned his head. Standing not quite 10 feet away from him was Ganondorf, his blade drawn. He caught up to them.
So, you are the hero of time. not just some spy of Impa's,"
he said, sneering.
"Well done, kid. I had my doubts about you, but it seems I was right. You are more useful to me alive. Or you were. That foolish Princess Zelda thought I would not suspect a little child would carry her ocarina and the stones. Don't look so shocked, boy. I worked out that instrument you dropped was the wrong one, so I did you a favor and burnt it."
Saria's ocarina! Link's heart stopped as the revelation hit him. The last gift Saria ever gave him was gone. His hands trembled as he tried to hold the Master Sword aloft, but it was too unwieldy in his small hands and far too heavy. He couldn't hope to attack Ganondorf with this, and the Gerudo King's smile meant only one thing. He knew he had Link trapped. He grinned as a wolf grins when it corners its prey, inching slowly in for the kill.
"Thanks, kid. You've led me to the Sacred Realm itself. All Hyrule and the world is mine. Do you know what the best part is? I owe it all to you."
Don't listen to him, Link!
Navi yelled. She appeared to overcome her fear far faster than he had. Her hands were on her hips as she glared at Ganondorf in angry defiance.
Leave him alone, you creep!
Ganondorf smirked.
"I do not lie, fairy. I will claim the Triforce, and then I will find that princess and kill her in the most excruciating manner I can think of."
Then he pointed a finger at Link.
"You, boy, will meet a similar fate. You have my thanks for helping me, but now your role has ended."
The blue flames rose higher around the dais, leaping towards the domed ceiling. Then the world began to spin. Link wanted to thrust the sword back into the stone to plug the seal he'd just broken, if that would even work, but he could not move. Ganondorf's laughter echoed around the temple, and blue light flashed across Link's vision. It blinded him right before everything went cold and dark.